The Aaron John F. Kennedy International Airport's Terminal 4 buzzed with the restless energy of travelers caught in the morning rush. Overhead, a digital sign glowed with crisp white letters. Delta Airlines Flight 1832, New York JFK to San Francisco SFO. Boarding in 40 minutes. The terminal was a chaotic symphony of rolling suitcases, hurried footsteps, and the faint aroma of overpriced coffee from a nearby stand. Families wrestled with strollers, business travelers hunched over laptops, and a group of college students, their backpacks stuffed to bursting, debated whether their surfboards would fit in the overhead bins. Amid the flurry, two women moved through the crowd, each a study in contrast, their paths destined to collide in a way that would shake an airline to its core. Aisha Coleman glided past the check-in kiosks with the calm precision of someone who knew exactly where she was going. Her long braids were swept into a sleek, low bun, and she wore a tailored charcoal gray pantsuit with a cream silk blouse that caught the fluorescent light just so. A single silver bangle adorned her wrist, understated yet elegant, and her posture shoulders back, chin slightly raised, drew second glances from passers-by. To them, she was just another polished professional, perhaps a lawyer or a consultant heading to a meeting. But Aisha was far more than that. For the past 10 months, she had been Delta Airlines' new chief executive officer, stepping into the role after a turbulent leadership shakeup. Today, she wasn't traveling in the plush comfort of first class, nor was she flanked by an entourage. Instead, she clutched an economy-class boarding pass, her identity carefully concealed. This wasn't just a business trip to finalize a tech partnership in Silicon Valley. It was a mission to see her airline through the eyes of its customers, unfiltered and raw. Aisha's dark eyes scanned the terminal with a quiet intensity. She noted the kiosks, one of which blinked with an error message, forcing a frustrated traveler to flag down an agent. She observed the long line snaking around the coffee stand, where a barista juggled orders with practiced speed. At Gate B32, passengers were already queuing, some pacing nervously, others slouched in hard plastic chairs. Aisha's gaze lingered on the Delta employees, a young gate agent with a bright smile, a baggage handler weaving through the crowd, and a flight attendant adjusting her scarf with a tired sigh. Some radiated warmth, greeting travelers with genuine care. Others looked worn down, their movements mechanical. This was why she was here, to understand the pulse of Delta's operations, to pinpoint what worked and what didn't. As the first black female CEO in the airline's history, Aisha carried a vision of transformation, one grounded in compassion, innovation, and an unshakable commitment to fairness. She believed Delta could rise above the industry's challenges, but only if she saw the truth for herself. Across the terminal, Karen Walsh moved with a clipped stride, her Delta uniform crisp but her expression anything but welcoming. Her blonde hair was pulled into a tight ponytail, and her lips pressed into a thin line that warned against small talk. Karen was a veteran flight attendant with 16 years at Delta under her belt, but her career had stalled. Passed over for promotions, she'd accumulated a file thick with passenger complaints, snide remarks, curt responses, a lack of patience that grated on even her colleagues. Just yesterday, her supervisor had pulled her aside after a report of her snapping at a mother struggling with a car seat. Karen had brushed it off, blaming the passenger's entitlement, but the reprimand stung. Today, her morning had started with a stalled subway train, a spilled coffee on her commute, and a headache that pulsed behind her eyes. By the time she reached Gate B32, her mood was a storm cloud, and everyone around her could feel the static. The gate area was a microcosm of the airport's chaos. An elderly couple hovered near the podium, their boarding passes clutched tightly as they explained to the gate agent, a young man named Jamal Carter, that they hadn't been seated together. Jamal's smile never wavered as he tapped at his keyboard, reassuring them with a warmth that made the couple visibly relax. "We'll get you sorted, don't worry," he said, his voice steady. Aisha watched from a distance, impressed by his poise. She made a mental note: recognize employees like him. They're the heart of this airline. When it was her turn, she stepped forward, handing Jamal her boarding pass. "Good morning," she said, her voice soft but clear. Jamal scanned the pass, his fingers quick on the keys. "All set, Ms. Coleman. Have a great flight." He handed it back with a nod, and Aisha offered a small smile before heading toward the jetway, out of earshot before anyone could connect the name A. Coleman to Delta's new CEO. Karen, meanwhile, was already at the gate. Her arms crossed as she surveyed the crowd with thinly veiled irritation. A passenger approached her, a harried father with a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. "Excuse me, is there any overhead?" "Space left?" he asked, his tone tentative. Karen's eyes flicked to the bag, then back to him. "It's a full flight," she said sharply. "If it doesn't fit, you'll have to check it." The man blinked, taken aback by her tone, and mumbled an apology before retreating. Karen sighed, loud enough for nearby passengers to glance up. She felt the weight of her seniority, the years she'd put in, and the lack of respect she believed she deserved. In her mind, the airline's politics cliques, favoritism had kept her from advancing. She never paused to consider her own role in those missed opportunities. The way her bitterness seeped into every interaction, Aisha slipped into the jetway, the cool, metallic tunnel amplifying the hum of anticipation. At the aircraft door, she was greeted by another flight attendant, Eleanor Rivera, whose warm brown eyes and genuine smile stood in stark contrast to Karen's demeanor. "Welcome aboard, ma'am," Eleanor said, gesturing toward the cabin. "Your seat's to the right, about halfway down." Aisha nodded, appreciative of the small kindness. "Thank you," she murmured, stepping into the Boeing 767's narrow aisle. The cabin smelled faintly of cleaning solution and recycled air, and passengers were already jostling for space, stuffing bags under seats and negotiating armrests. Aisha's seat, 3 to be, was a middle one in economy, a deliberate choice to experience the reality of most Delta travelers. She stowed her slim carry-on with care, ensuring it fit within the guidelines, and settled into the seat, buckling her belt with a soft click. The fabric was stiffer than she remembered, the legroom tighter. "Review economy seat comfort," she noted mentally. Already compiling a list for her next board meeting, Karen boarded soon after, her presence like a cold front moving through the cabin. She began her pre-flight checks with mechanical efficiency, her voice cutting through the chatter as she addressed a passenger whose bag protruded slightly from under the seat. "Sir, that needs to be fully stowed," she said, her tone more command than request. The passenger, a young man in a hoodie, fumbled to comply, his cheeks reddening. Karen moved on, her eyes sweeping the rows with a scrutiny that felt more accusatory than procedural. When she reached Aisha's row, she paused, her gaze lingering on Aisha for a beat longer than necessary. "Seatbelt," she barked, though Aisha's was already fastened. Aisha met her eyes briefly, sensing the edge in Karen's voice, but chose not to respond. She was here to observe, not to engage, not yet. As the jetway retracted and the plane began to taxi, Aisha leaned back, her mind racing. The cabin vibrated with the low rumble of engines, and she felt the familiar thrill of takeoff, the moment when the world below would shrink into a patchwork of lights. She closed her eyes, reflecting on the weight of her role. At 42, she was a trailblazer, a black woman leading one of the world's largest airlines. The responsibility was immense, but so was her resolve. She'd spent her career dismantling barriers, advocating for equity, and building teams that thrived on mutual respect. Delta, she believed, could set a new standard, an airline where every passenger felt valued, every employee empowered. But to get there, she needed to see the cracks in the system, the places where prejudice or neglect festered. People like Karen, if they existed in her workforce, would be a test of that vision. Aisha wasn't naive. She knew change wouldn't come easily. But as the plane lifted off, the New York skyline fading into the distance, she felt a spark of hope. Whatever lay ahead on this flight, she was ready to face it. The Boeing 767 sliced through the clouds, its engines humming a steady drone as Delta Flight 1830 to climb toward cruising altitude. Inside the economy cabin, the initial bustle of boarding had settled into a restless quiet. Passengers flipped through in-flight magazines, scrolled on their phones, or stared blankly at the seatbacks in front of them. The air was cool, tinged with the faint metallic scent of recycled oxygen. and the overhead lights cast a sterile glow over the rows. Aisha Coleman, tucked into the middle seat of 3-to-be, adjusted her posture to ease the pressure of the narrow armrests digging into her sides. Her charcoal gray suit jacket was neatly folded in her lap, and she kept her eyes subtly alert, taking in every detail of the cabin. As Delta's CEO, traveling incognito, she was here to observe the unvarnished reality of her airline's service. But already, she could sense a current of unease rippling through the rows, emanating from one figure in particular, Karen Walsh. Karen moved down the aisle with the precision of a drill sergeant, her Delta blue scarf tied with almost aggressive neatness. Her face was a mask of barely contained frustration, her lips pursed as if every passenger were a personal inconvenience. She'd already snapped at a teenager whose backpack had slipped into the aisle, her voice sharp enough to make nearby heads turn. "Keep it out of the way," she'd said, her tone leaving no room for discussion. The boy had mumbled an apology, shoving the bag under his seat with a flush of embarrassment. Karen didn't linger to soften the moment. She just kept moving, her eyes scanning for the next infraction. Aisha watched, her fingers resting lightly on the edge of her folded jacket. She'd seen this kind of behavior before, employees worn thin by the grind, their patience fraying under pressure. But Karen's demeanor wasn't just fatigue. It was something harder, more personal. And it set Aisha's instincts on edge. Across the aisle, Elena Rivera, the other flight attendant on duty, was a stark contrast. Her movements were fluid, her smile genuine as she helped an elderly woman adjust her seatbelt. "There you go, all set," Elena said, her voice warm with a hint of a southern accent. The woman, whose hands trembled slightly, thanked her profusely, and Elena patted her arm before moving on. Aisha noted the interaction, her mind cataloging the difference between Elena's approach and Karen's. Elena seemed to understand that small acts of kindness could diffuse tension, while Karen's every word seemed to stoke it. Aisha pulled out her phone, discreetly typing a note. "Evaluate flight attendant training. Emphasize de-escalation and empathy." She'd seen enough in her first hour aboard to know that Delta's customer experience was inconsistent, and that inconsistency could erode trust. The plane leveled off at 35,000 feet, and the captain's voice crackled over the intercom, smooth and professional. "Folks, we've reached our cruising altitude. Should be a smooth ride to San Francisco, with an estimated arrival time of to 45 p.m. local time. Sit back, relax, and we'll be starting beverage service shortly." The seatbelt sign blinked off, and a murmur of activity rippled through the cabin. A child a few rows ahead squealed with delight, waving a plastic toy plane, while his mother shushed him gently. A man in a business suit unbuckled and stood, retrieving a laptop from the overhead bin. Aisha leaned back, her eyes drifting to the window seat, where a college student was sketching in a notebook, her earbuds blasting faintly audible music. The normalcy of it all was comforting, a reminder of why Aisha loved aviation the way it brought strangers together, each with their own stories, bound for a shared destination. But the calm was short-lived. Karen's voice cut through the hum, sharp and impatient. "Sir, you need to stow that properly," she said, addressing a middle-aged man who'd placed a small roller bag under his feet. The man, startled, looked up from his phone. "It's fine, isn't it? It's not in the way." Karen's eyes narrowed. "It's a safety hazard. Push it all the way under, or I'll have to gate check it." Her tone was less about policy and more about asserting control. The man sighed, complying with a muttered complaint, and Karen moved on, her shoulders rigid. Aisha's jaw tightened. She understood the need for safety, but Karen's approach was needlessly confrontational. It wasn't just about the bag, it was about power, and Karen wielded it like a blunt weapon. Beverage service began, and Elena and Karen pushed the metal cart down the aisle, their dynamic almost comically mismatched. Elena greeted each row with a smile, offering options with a practiced ease. "Coffee, tea, soda, or water?" she asked, handing a ginger ale to a woman with a toddler on her lap. Karen, on the other hand, rattled off the choices like a script she resented reciting. When a passenger hesitated, asking if there was decaf, Karen's response was curt, only regular. Next, Aisha watched, her fingers tapping lightly on her phone. She requested a sparkling water and a pack of pretzels, keeping her tone polite but neutral. Elena handed them over with a nod, while Karen barely glanced her way, already moving to the next row. Aisha sipped the water, the bubbles sharp against her throat, and added another note. Assess crew. Workload. Are breaks sufficient? An hour into the flight, the cabin settled into a lull. The lights dimmed slightly, encouraging passengers to rest, and the hum of the engines became a soothing backdrop. Aisha opened her tablet, reviewing a report on Delta's planned expansion into Asian markets. The numbers were promising, but her mind kept drifting to the human element, the employees who made those numbers possible. She thought of Jamal, the gate agent whose kindness had stood out, and Elena, whose warmth was a balm in the high-stress environment. But Karen loomed larger, a reminder that even one bad apple could sour the experience. Aisha had dealt with difficult employees before, in her previous roles at smaller firms, but as CEO, the stakes were higher. Every interaction reflected on her leadership, on the culture she was trying to build. Trouble brewed a few rows ahead. A young mother, her face etched with exhaustion, was struggling to keep her two boys, maybe 5 and 7, from squirming. The older boy was flipping through the in-flight magazine, giggling at a cartoon, while the younger one bounced a rubber ball that slipped from his hand and rolled into the aisle. Karen, who'd been checking tray tables, pounced. "Ma'am, you need to control your kids," she said, her voice loud enough to draw stares. The mother flushed, reaching for the ball. "I'm sorry, they're just excited," she said, her tone apologetic. Karen didn't soften. "Excited or not, they're disturbing other passengers. Keep them quiet." The mother nodded, pulling her boys closer, her eyes glistening with embarrassment. Aisha's stomach churned. The boys weren't being disruptive, they were being kids. Karen's reaction was disproportionate, her words laced with a disdain that felt personal. Elena, sensing the tension, stepped in. She crouched to the boys' level, her smile disarming. "Hey there, you guys like to draw? I've got some coloring pages in the back." The boys' faces lit up, and their mother mouthed a grateful thank you. Elena glanced at Karen, who rolled her eyes and muttered something under her breath about babysitting. Aisha caught the exchange, her grip tightening on her tablet. Elena's intervention had de-escalated the situation, but Karen's attitude was a liability. Aisha added another note. Implement conflict resolution training, mandatory for all crew. She knew flight attendants faced immense pressure, long hours, demanding passengers, tight schedules, but there was no excuse for cruelty. As the flight stretched on, Aisha's thoughts turned inward. She'd climbed to the top of Delta through sheer grit, navigating corporate boardrooms where she was often the only black woman at the table. She'd faced subtle slights, coded language, and the constant pressure to prove herself. Now, as CEO, she was determined to root out any trace of bias in her airline, to create a culture where respect was non-negotiable. Karen's behavior was a red flag, a sign that Delta's training and oversight needed an overhaul. Aisha wasn't naive. She knew change would meet resistance, that some would cling to old ways. But she also knew the power of accountability, of setting a standard and holding everyone to it. The plane hit a pocket of light turbulence, and the captain's voice returned, calm but firm. "Folks, we're experiencing a bit of chop. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." Aisha complied, stowing her tablet and glancing around. The cabin tensed, passengers gripping armrests or exchanging nervous looks. Karen marched down the aisle, her expression almost gleeful as she barked orders. "Belts on, trays up," she said, her voice cutting through the hum. When she reached Aisha's row, her eyes flicked over her again, lingering with a hint of scrutiny. Aisha met her gaze, her face impassive, but inside, she felt a spark of unease. Karen's hostility wasn't random, it was targeted, and Aisha had a sinking feeling it was about to escalate. The cabin of Delta Flight 1832 hummed with the low thrum of engines, but an undercurrent of tension pulsed through the rows. The dimmed lights and scattered snores of passengers belied the storm brewing in the economy section. Aisha Coleman sat in 3B, her posture composed despite the cramped middle seat, her charcoal gray suit jacket still folded neatly across her lap. As Delta's CEO, traveling incognito, she'd been cataloging every detail of the flight, the warmth of flight attendant Elena Rivera, the The professionalism of gate agent Jamal Carter, and the troubling hostility of Karen Walsh. Aisha's tablet rested in her bag, her mental notes piling up, training deficiencies, inconsistent service, and Karen's growing abrasiveness. She sensed a confrontation looming, but nothing could have prepared her for the explosion about to erupt. The plane had been cruising smoothly for nearly 2 hours, the San Francisco skyline still a distant promise. Beverage service had wrapped up, and most passengers were settled, some dozing, others tapping on screens or flipping through magazines. Aisha's eyes flicked to her window seat neighbor, a college student sketching intricate patterns in a notebook, her earbuds faintly buzzing with music. Across the aisle, a young mother was soothing her two boys, who'd quieted down after Elena's kind offer of coloring pages. The cabin felt almost peaceful, a fragile bubble of routine. But Karen Walsh was a live wire, her every movement charged with irritation. She'd retreated to the galley briefly, only to return with a renewed edge, her blue scarf slightly askew as if her composure was unraveling alongside her mood. Karen's voice sliced through the calm, addressing a passenger a few rows ahead. "Ma'am, your bag's sticking out again," she said, her tone sharp enough to startle the woman, who was adjusting a tote under her seat. The woman, flustered, apologized and shoved the bag further in. Karen didn't acknowledge the compliance. She just moved on, her eyes scanning for the next target. Aisha watched, her fingers tightening around the edge of her jacket. Karen's behavior wasn't just unprofessional, it was predatory, as if she were looking for reasons to assert dominance. Aisha had seen this before in corporate settings, people who wielded authority to mask their insecurities. But in a confined space like an airplane, it was a recipe for disaster. The first jolt of turbulence hit without warning, a sudden lurch that made the cabin gasp. Overhead bins rattled, and a few passengers gripped their armrests. The captain's voice came over the intercom, steady but firm. "Folks, we're hitting some unexpected turbulence. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. Flight attendants, take your stations." The seatbelt sign pinged on, bathing the cabin in a soft amber glow. Aisha checked her belt, already secure, and glanced around. The college student next to her stuffed her notebook into the seat pocket, her eyes wide. The young mother across the aisle hugged her boys, whispering reassurances. Karen, undeterred, continued her march down the aisle, checking bins and barking orders. "Belts on, now," she snapped at a man who'd stood to stretch. He sat quickly, muttering under his breath. The turbulence intensified, the plane swaying like a boat on choppy waters. Aisha's stomach tightened, not from fear, but from the growing sense that Karen's volatility was a ticking bomb. Elena, by contrast, moved with calm efficiency, her voice soothing as she helped a nervous passenger secure a tray table. "We'll be through this in no time," Elena said, her smile a lifeline in the tense cabin. Aisha made another mental note: promote employees like Elena. They're the backbone of trust. But her focus snapped back to Karen, who was now near row 30, her face flushed with frustration. A passenger had asked for a blanket, and Karen's response was a curt, "We're in turbulence." "Wait," the passenger, an older man, nodded meekly, but Karen's tone had drawn stares. Aisha's unease deepened. Karen wasn't just stressed, she was unraveling. The plane lurched again, harder this time, and a loud thud echoed from above Aisha's row. An overhead bin had popped open, and a laptop bag slid out, landing with a thud near her feet. The passenger in the aisle seat, a middle-aged man in a polo shirt, jumped up, his face apologetic. "That's mine. I'm so sorry," he said, reaching for the bag. Aisha, reacting instinctively, leaned down to nudge the laptop away from the aisle, preventing it from sliding further. Before she could say anything, Karen was there, her eyes blazing. "Why is that bin open?" she demanded, her voice loud enough to hush nearby rows. Her gaze locked onto Aisha, ignoring the man who'd already claimed responsibility. "You need to keep your belongings secure," Karen snapped, her tone accusing. Aisha's pulse quickened, but she kept her voice steady. "This isn't mine," she said, gesturing to the man. "It belongs to him." The man raised his hand, his voice sheepish. "Yeah, it's mine." Must have shifted during the turbulence. Karen's eyes flicked to him briefly, but she doubled down on Aisha, her frustration finding a target. "Then why are you touching it?" she said, her voice dripping with disdain. Aisha's jaw tightened, but she maintained her calm. "I was just moving it out of the way. It could have been dangerous." Her words were measured, deliberate, but Karen's face twisted, as if Aisha's composure was a personal affront. The cabin seemed to hold its breath. Passengers nearby shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting between Aisha and Karen. The turbulence had eased slightly, but the tension in row 32 was electric. Karen leaned closer, her voice lowering to a venomous hiss. "You people always think you can do whatever you want," she said, the words laced with a bigotry that hit Aisha like a physical blow. "If you can't follow the rules, maybe you shouldn't be on this flight." The phrase "you people" hung in the air, a toxic cloud that silenced the rows around them. Aisha's heart pounded, a mix of anger and disbelief surging through her. She'd faced racism before, subtle jabs in boardrooms, coded comments at conferences, but this was raw, unfiltered, and public. Her cheek burned as if Karen's words had already struck her. Before Aisha could respond, the plane jolted again. A sharp dip that sent a tray of empty cups Karen had been collecting crashing to the floor. One cup, half filled with orange juice, splashed across Aisha's lap, soaking her suit pants. She jerked back, her breath catching. "Ma'am, please," she exclaimed, her voice sharp with shock but still controlled. The cabin erupted in murmurs, passengers craning their necks to see. Karen's face reddened, her eyes wild with a mix of rage and embarrassment. For a moment, it seemed she might back down, might apologize. But something snapped inside her, a culmination of her bad day, her stalled career, her unchecked prejudices. Without warning, she raised her hand and swung, her palm connecting with Aisha's cheek in a stinging slap that echoed through the cabin. Time seemed to freeze. Aisha's head snapped to the side, her cheek burning with a pain that was as much emotional as physical. The cabin gasped collectively, a chorus of disbelief. A woman across the aisle whispered, "Did she just?" A man a row back fumbled for his phone, unsure whether to record or intervene. The young mother clutched her boys, who stared wide-eyed. Aisha's hand flew to her cheek, her eyes stinging with tears she refused to let fall. She was no stranger to adversity, but this was a violation, a public humiliation that cut deeper than any corporate slight. Her first instinct was to stand, to reveal her identity as Delta's CEO and shut this down. But she held back, her mind racing. This wasn't about her title. It was about what Karen's actions represented, and Aisha needed to handle it with precision. Elena was there in an instant, her face a mask of horror. "Karen, what the hell did you do?" she hissed, grabbing Karen's arm. Karen yanked free, her expression a mix of defiance and shock, as if she couldn't believe her own actions. She was being belligerent. Karen stammered, her voice faltering. Elena shook her head, her eyes flashing. "You need to go to the galley." Now, the head flight attendant, Roland Tate, appeared, drawn by the commotion. A tall man with a graying beard. He took one look at the scene and stepped in, his voice low but commanding. "Karen, step away. You're done here." Karen opened her mouth to protest, but Roland's glare silenced her. She turned and stormed toward the back, her shoulders rigid, leaving a wake of stunned silence. Roland knelt beside Aisha, his voice gentle. "Ma'am, are you okay?" "I'm so sorry. That was completely unacceptable." Aisha pressed her hand to her cheek, the skin still throbbing. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I'm fine," she said, her voice quieter than she felt. "But this needs to be addressed." Roland nodded, his face etched with guilt. "Absolutely. We'll file a report, and you have every right to press charges. If you'd like, we can move you to a different seat." Aisha considered it, her mind still processing the slap, the words, the weight of what had just happened. Before she could respond, passengers began to speak up, their voices a mix of outrage and support. "That was disgusting," said a man in a suit a row ahead. "I've never seen anything like that." The young mother added, "She was rude to us too." "This is unbelievable." Eleanor returned with a napkin wrapped around ice from the beverage cart. "Here, this might help," she said, her eyes apologetic. Aisha accepted it, pressing the cool cloth to her cheek. "Thank you," she said, meeting Eleanor's gaze. The gesture was small, but grounding, a reminder that not everyone in Delta's uniform was like Karen. Roland stood, his expression grim. "Ma'am, if you'd like to speak to the captain when it's safe, I can arrange it." Aisha nodded, her resolve hardening. "I would. And I'll need to speak with corporate as well." Roland hesitated, sensing the weight behind her words, but not yet understanding why. "Of course," he said. "I'll let him know." Aisha leaned back, the ice soothing the sting, but not the anger simmering inside. The cabin buzzed with whispers, passengers recounting the incident in hushed tones. She could feel their eyes on her, some sympathetic, others curious. She was still Aisha Coleman, Delta's CEO. But in this moment, she was also a black woman who'd been assaulted, humiliated in front of strangers. The duality was jarring, and it fueled her determination. Karen's actions weren't just a personal attack, they were a symptom of a deeper problem. One Aisha was now more committed than ever to rooting out. As the plane steadied and the turbulence faded, she closed her eyes, steeling herself for what came next. This flight was no longer just a fact-finding mission. It was a battleground, and Aisha was ready to fight. The cabin of Delta Flight 1832 felt like a pressure cooker, the air thick with the aftershock of Karen Walsh's outburst. The turbulence had subsided, but the emotional storm lingered, rippling through whispered conversations and stolen glances. Aisha Coleman sat in 3-to-be, her cheek still tingling from the slap, the ice-filled napkin pressed against her skin, now damp and warm. Her charcoal gray suit pants were stained with orange juice, a stark reminder of the chaos that had unfolded. As Delta's CEO, she'd boarded this flight to observe her airline's operations unnoticed. But the assault had changed everything. The weight of her dual identity, victim and leader, pressed heavily on her, and she knew the next steps would define not just this flight, but her tenure at Delta. The head flight attendant, Roland Tate, hovered nearby, his face a mix of concern and professionalism. He'd escorted Karen to the galley, barring her from further passenger contact, and now knelt beside Aisha's seat, his voice low. "Ma'am, we're about an hour and a half from San Francisco. I've informed the captain, and he's ready to speak with you when it's safe. Is there anything else I can do?" Aisha met his gaze, her composure a shield against the raw anger inside. "Thank you, Roland. I'd like to move to a quieter seat, and I need to speak to the captain as soon as possible." Roland nodded, his brow furrowed. "Of course. We have a few empty seats in business class. I'll get that set up." He paused, then added, "I'm truly sorry this happened. This isn't who we are." Aisha's lips pressed into a thin line. She wanted to believe him, but Karen's actions suggested otherwise. Eleanor Rivera, the other flight attendant, approached with a fresh napkin and a bottle of water. "Here, in case you need it," she said, her eyes soft with empathy. Aisha accepted the water, her fingers brushing Eleanor's briefly. "I appreciate your kindness," she said, her voice steady but warm. Eleanor's presence was a small anchor in the chaos, a reminder that Delta still had employees who embodied the values Aisha championed. As Eleanor stepped away, passengers nearby began to speak up, their voices a chorus of indignation. A woman in a sweater leaned forward. "That flight attendant was out of line. I saw the whole thing. She had no reason to touch you." A man in a baseball cap nodded. "She was rude from the start. You should sue." Aisha offered a small nod, acknowledging their support, but keeping her focus inward. She wasn't ready to reveal her identity, not yet. Roland returned, gesturing toward the front of the plane. "Ma'am, we've got a seat ready in business class. I can take you there now." Aisha gathered her belongings, her tablet, her stained jacket, her carry-on, and followed him, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes tracking her through the aisle. Whispers trailed her like a wake. "That's the woman who got hit. Did you hear what the flight attendant said? She's handling it so calmly." Aisha kept her head high, her steps measured, refusing to let the humiliation define her. The business class cabin was quieter, the seats wider and cushioned, a stark contrast to the cramped economy row. She settled into foray, a window seat, and buckled her belt, her mind racing. The view outside, endless clouds tinged with gold from the setting sun, offered a fleeting moment of calm, but Aisha's thoughts were anything but serene. She needed to act, not just as a passenger but as the leader of Delta. The slap wasn't just a personal affront, It was a breach of everything her airline stood for. Karen's words, "you people," echoed in her mind, a blatant display of prejudice that Aisha couldn't ignore. She pulled out her phone, using the in-flight Wi-Fi, to send a brief email to her Chief of Staff, Marcus Ellis. Incident on Flight 1832. Assault by flight attendant. Prepare legal and HR teams. I'll brief you on landing. She hit send, knowing the message would set off alarms at Delta's Atlanta headquarters. Marcus would mobilize the crisis team, and by the time the plane touched down, the machinery of corporate response would be in motion. Back in economy, the cabin buzzed with gossip. Passengers recounted the incident, some exaggerating details, others piecing together what they'd seen. The young mother with 2 boys spoke to her seatmate, her voice low. "She was so mean to my kids earlier. I can't believe she hit someone." A man in a suit, who'd been typing furiously on his laptop, shook his head. "Delta's gonna have a PR nightmare." Elena moved through the rows, her smile strained but professional, picking up the slack for Karen's absence. She handed out snacks, answered questions, and deflected curious glances with practiced ease. In the galley, Karen sat isolated, her arms crossed, her face a mask of defiance. Roland had instructed her to stay put, and the other crew members kept their distance, their silence a tacit condemnation. Aisha's thoughts turned to the captain. She needed to ensure this incident was handled with the utmost seriousness, and that started at the top of the flight's chain of command. When the seatbelt sign blinked off, Roland approached. "Ma'am, the captain's available now. I can take you to the cockpit door." Aisha nodded, rising from her seat. As she followed Roland through the business class cabin, she felt the weight of her decision. Revealing her identity was a risk. It could shift the dynamic, make her seem like she was pulling rank. But the magnitude of Karen's actions demanded it. This wasn't just about one flight attendant's meltdown. It was about the culture of an airline, and Aisha was determined to set the tone. At the cockpit door, Roland knocked softly and stepped inside, speaking in hushed tones to the captain. Moments later, the door opened and Captain Daniel Harper emerged, a weary man in his late 50s with salt and pepper hair, and a calm demeanor honed by decades in the air. "Ms. Coleman," he said, his voice steady but laced with concern. "I'm deeply sorry for what happened. This is unacceptable on my flight." Aisha met his gaze, her expression resolute. "Thank you, Captain. I need to speak with you privately." Harper nodded, gesturing for her to step into the small space near the galley, away from prying ears. Roland lingered nearby, his face tense. Aisha took a breath, her voice low but firm. "Captain, I'm Aisha Coleman, Delta's Chief Executive Officer." The words landed like a thunderclap. Harper's eyes widened, his calm facade cracking for a split second. Roland, standing a few feet away, froze, his mouth parting slightly. I had no idea," Harper said, recovering quickly. "Ms. Coleman, I assure you, we'll handle this with the utmost seriousness." Aisha nodded, her cheeks still throbbing faintly. "I know you will. For now, ensure Karen Walsh has no further contact with passengers. I don't want this flight diverted unless absolutely necessary. We can handle this in San Francisco. But I'll need a full report from you, the crew, and any witnesses. This isn't just a personnel issue, it's a legal one." Harper's jaw tightened, his respect for her authority evident. "Understood. I'll make sure she's confined to the galley, and we'll document everything. We're about 90 minutes out. I'll keep you updated." Aisha thanked him, her voice steady despite the storm inside. As she returned to her seat, Roland followed, his expression a mix of shock and guilt. "Ms. Coleman, if I'd known," Aisha cut him off gently. "You couldn't have. Just focus on keeping the cabin calm and getting us to San Francisco." Roland nodded, retreating to the galley with a renewed sense of purpose. Back in foray, Aisha leaned against the window, the clouds below now a deep indigo as the plane chased the sunset. The cabin's whispers had evolved. Word of her identity was spreading, passed from passenger to passenger like a secret too big to contain. "She's the CEO. No way. That's why she was so calm. That flight attendant's done for." Aisha ignored the murmurs, her mind on the bigger picture. This incident would test her leadership, her vision for Delta. She'd come aboard to observe, to learn, but now she was at the center of a crisis. Karen's actions had exposed a fault line in Delta's culture, one Aisha was determined to repair. She opened her tablet, drafting a mental roadmap, legal action, crew retraining, a public statement. Transparency would be key. She wouldn't let Delta sweep this under the rug. As the plane began its descent, the cabin lights brightened, and Elena's voice came over the intercom, smooth and professional. "Folks, we're starting our approach to San Francisco. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened and your seats are upright." Aisha buckled up, her resolve hardening. The landing would mark the end of this flight, but the beginning of a reckoning. Karen Walsh had crossed a line, and Aisha would ensure the consequences were swift and clear. For now, she closed her eyes. The hum of the engines, a steady reminder of the journey ahead, not just to San Francisco, but to a Delta that lived up to her vision of unity and respect. The Boeing 767 touched down at San Francisco International Airport with a gentle thud, the tires kissing the tarmac as Delta Flight 1832 came to rest. The cabin exhaled collectively, passengers stirring from their seats, eager to escape the confines of the 6-hour journey. But for Aisha Coleman, now seated in the plush comfort of business class seat 4A, the landing marked not an end but a beginning. The sting on her cheek had faded to a dull ache, but the memory of Karen Walsh's slap hand, the venomous words that preceded it, burned fresh. As Delta's CEO, Aisha had revealed her identity to the captain, setting in motion a chain of events that would reverberate through the airline. Her stained charcoal gray suit pants and the weight of her dual role as victim and leader anchored her resolve. This wasn't just about her, it was about every passenger and employee who deserved respect. The seatbelt sign blinked off, and the cabin sprang to life. Overhead bins clicked open, bags were retrieved, and passengers shuffled toward the exit. Aisha remained seated, her tablet in her lap, her mind racing through the steps ahead. She'd already emailed her chief of staff, Marcus Ellis, alerting him to the assault. By now, Delta's legal and HR teams would be mobilizing, and a crisis management meeting would be scheduled. Aisha knew the incident couldn't be contained. Too many witnesses, too much outrage. Transparency was her only option, and she was determined to face the storm head-on. As she gathered her belongings, she caught the eyes of passengers passing by. Some offered sympathetic nods, others whispered to their companions, their glances heavy with curiosity. Word of her identity as Delta's CEO had spread, turning her into the flight's unspoken centerpiece. Eleanor Rivera, the flight attendant whose kindness had been a beacon during the chaos, approached with a tentative smile. "Ms. Coleman, we're so sorry again. If you need anything before you deplane, just let me know." Aisha met her gaze, appreciating the sincerity. "Thank you, Elena. Your professionalism made a difference today. I'll remember that." Elena's cheeks flushed slightly, and she nodded before stepping away to assist other passengers. Aisha made a mental note to ensure Elena's efforts were recognized, perhaps a commendation or a role in training reform. Employees like her were the foundation of the Delta she envisioned. Roland Tate, the head flight attendant, appeared next, his expression a mix of deference and unease. "Ms. Coleman, I've arranged for you to deplane last, if that's okay. We've got security and an HR representative waiting at the gate. And Ms. Walsh is still in the galley. She won't be near you." Aisha nodded, her voice calm but firm. "Good. I'd like to speak with her before I leave, but I want security present. This needs to be handled carefully." Roland's eyes widened slightly, but he agreed. "Of course, I'll make it happen." He hesitated, then added, "I can't tell you how sorry I am. This shouldn't have happened." Aisha's lips pressed into a thin line. "It shouldn't have, but it did. Now we fix it." As the cabin emptied, Aisha stood, smoothing her stained pants and slipping her tablet into her carry-on. The business class section was nearly deserted, the hum of the plane's systems the only sound. She moved toward the exit, her steps deliberate, feeling the weight of every gaze that had followed her since the incident. At the jetway, two airport security officers stood waiting, their navy uniforms crisp and their expressions neutral. A Delta HR representative, a woman in her 40s named Carla Nguyen, approached, her face etched with concern. "Ms. Coleman, I'm Carla, from HR. We've been briefed, and we're here to support you. Whatever you need, we'll make it happen." Aisha shook her hand, noting Carla's steady demeanor. "Thank you, Carla. Let's start with a private space to speak with Ms. Walsh, and then I'll need a debrief with the crew and any witness statements." Carla led Aisha to a quiet corner of the gate area, a small lounge typically reserved for VIPs. The security officers positioned themselves nearby, their presence a silent reassurance. Roland appeared, escorting Karen Walsh, who walked with her arms crossed, her face a mask of defiance tinged with fear. Karen's uniform was slightly disheveled, her scarf loosened, and her eyes darted around, avoiding Aisha's. Elena stood a few feet away, her arms folded, her expression one of quiet disapproval. Aisha took a deep breath, centering herself. This wasn't about revenge, it was about accountability. "Ms. Walsh," Aisha began, her voice steady and authoritative, "I want to hear what you have to say for yourself." Karen's jaw tightened, and for a moment, she said nothing, her gaze fixed on the floor. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, laced with bitterness. "I'm sorry it got out of hand. I was stressed, and you were challenging me." Aisha's eyes narrowed, her patience thinning. "I didn't challenge you. I corrected your mistake about the bag, and I stayed calm even after your racist remarks. Nothing I did justified you striking me." Karen flinched at the word racist, her face reddening. "I didn't mean it like that," she muttered. "It's a tough job, okay? You don't get it dealing with people all day, every day." Aisha's voice remained even, but her words carried the weight of her authority. "I lead a company of 80,000 employees. I understand pressure, but violence and bigotry have no place here. You didn't just break policy, you broke trust. With me, with every passenger, with Delta." Karen's eyes glistened, but she offered no real apology, only excuses. "I've been with Delta 16 years, she said, her voice cracking. "You can't just throw that away." Aisha's expression didn't waver. "You threw it away when you raised your hand. There will be consequences, legal and professional. Delta's legal team and law enforcement will follow up." Karen's shoulders slumped, but she said nothing more, her defiance crumbling under the reality of her actions. Aisha turned to the security officers. "Please escort Ms. Walsh out. I'm done here." The officers nodded, guiding Karen away. She cast a final glance back, her eyes a mix of resentment and desperation. But Aisha's focus had already shifted. She thanked Carla and Roland, then addressed Elena. "Your actions today showed what Delta can be. I'll need your statement. But more than that, I need people like you to help rebuild what was broken here." Elena nodded, her expression resolute. "I'm ready, Ms. Coleman." Outside the lounge, a black SUV waited to whisk Aisha to Delta's San Francisco offices. She sank into the back seat, the leather cool against her skin, and let out a trembling breath. Her phone buzzed incessantly, messages from Marcus, the legal team, and even a board member who'd caught wind of the incident. The crisis was escalating, and Aisha knew the media would soon descend. She typed a quick reply to Marcus, set up a meeting with legal, HR, and PR for tonight. "We go public with this full transparency." As the SUV pulled away, the airport's lights fading behind her, Aisha's mind turned to the passengers who had witnessed the incident. Their support, their outrage, had been a reminder of why she fought for Delta. This wasn't just her airline, it was theirs, to ... At Delta's downtown office, Marcus greeted her in the lobby, his face a mix of worry and determination. "Aisha, are you okay?" he asked, his voice low. She forced a small smile, her cheeks still sore. "I'll be fine. Let's get to work." They rode the elevator to the top floor, where a conference room awaited, already filled with key executives, General Counsel Laura Patel, HR Director James Kwan, and PR Head Vanessa Reed. The air was thick with urgency. Aisha took her seat at the head of the table, her stained suit a silent testament to the day's events. "Let's be clear," she began, her voice cutting through the tension. "I was assaulted by a Delta flight attendant today, and her actions were fueled by racial bias. This isn't just a violation of policy, it's a betrayal of our values. We're not hiding this. We issue a statement tonight, expressing regret, confirming action, and committing to change. I'm pressing charges, and I expect full cooperation with law enforcement." Laura nodded, scribbling notes. We'll terminate Ms. Walsh immediately. The union may push back, but assault is a clear-cut case. James added, we'll launch an internal investigation to ensure this doesn't happen again. Training, oversight, everything's on the table. Vanessa, ever the strategist, leaned forward. The media's already sniffing around. We need to control the narrative. A statement, maybe an interview. Show strength. Aisha rubbed her temple, the weight of the day settling in. Draft the statement. Vanessa, I'll review it before it goes out. And yes, I'll do one interview. But it's about accountability, not drama. The team dispersed, each with their marching orders. Aisha lingered, staring out the window at the San Francisco skyline, its lights a stark contrast to the darkness she felt. This was her test not just as a CEO, but as a black woman leading in a world quick to judge. She'd face it with the same resolve that had carried her to this office, knowing that every step forward would be a step for Delta, for its people, for justice. The San Francisco office of Delta Airlines buzzed with urgency, its glass walls reflecting the city's twinkling lights as Aisha Coleman sat at a conference table, her tablet open to a draft public statement. The words were precise, condemning the assault by Flight Attendant Karen Walsh, affirming Delta's commitment to justice, promising reform, but they couldn't erase the sting of that moment on Flight 1832. Aisha's cheek no longer burned, but Karen's slap and her venomous "you people" echoed in her mind, a wound that cut deeper than the physical blow. As Delta's CEO, Aisha had faced crises before, but this was a crucible, testing her resolve as both a leader and a black woman. Her phone vibrated with notifications, urgent emails from executives, texts from her chief of staff, Marcus Ellis, and alerts from news outlets already sniffing out the story. The world was watching, and Aisha knew her response would shape Delta's legacy. By dawn, the incident had ignited a media firestorm. Headlines blared, Delta CEO assaulted by flight attendant. In shocking racist incident, CNN aired a shaky passenger video, the slap replayed in slow motion. Karen's hand a blur against Aisha's face. Atlanta's local news, tied to Delta's headquarters, ran non-stop coverage. While social media exploded with outrage, passengers from the flight posted first-hand accounts, condemning Karen and praising Aisha's composure. She stayed so calm, one wrote. That's real strength, Aisha. Scrolled through the posts, her jaw tight, and sent a few to Vanessa Reed, Delta's PR head. Amplify these, she instructed. Show we're listening. The public's support was a lifeline, but the anger was fierce, and Aisha knew Delta had to act swiftly to harness it. Delta's statement, released at 7:30 a.m., was unflinching. Delta Airlines is appalled by the assault on our CEO, Aisha Coleman, by a flight attendant on Flight 1832. This act, compounded by discriminatory remarks, violates everything we stand for. The employee has been terminated, and we are fully cooperating with law enforcement. We are launching immediate reforms to ensure this never happens again. Aisha added a personal note. As a passenger and CEO, I am shaken but determined. Delta will emerge stronger, rooted in respect for all. The statement landed well, trending online, but Aisha knew words alone wouldn't suffice. The media craved details, and the legal battle was just beginning. Aisha had chosen to press charges, a decision she'd finalized with General Counsel Laura Patel in San Francisco. Laura had liaised with police, filing a criminal complaint backed by witness statements. Eleanor Rivera's testimony was particularly compelling, detailing Karen's hostility throughout the flight and her unprovoked attack. The man whose laptop bag sparked the confrontation confirmed Aisha's innocence, while the young mother with 2 boys described Karen's earlier rudeness. Aisha reviewed the documents in her temporary office, her stained suit swapped for a fresh blazer. The evidence was ironclad, but she braced for a drawn-out fight, especially with Karen's union likely to push back. Karen Walsh, now jobless, was crumbling under scrutiny. Delta's termination letter, citing gross misconduct, had arrived at her Queens apartment, where reporters soon followed. She fled to a friend's home upstate, her phone off, her social media accounts dark. Her union representative, Tom Delaney, took her case, arguing that Karen was overwhelmed by job stress. and that Aisha's assertive response had escalated things. The claim rang hollow against the passenger video and testimonies, but Tom persisted. Banking on Karen's 16-year tenure, Aisha, briefed by Laura, shook her head. "She's grasping," Aisha said. "This isn't about stress, it's about prejudice." She was determined to see accountability, not just for herself but for every passenger who'd faced bias. The media pressure mounted. Vanessa urged Aisha to do a single, high-profile interview to shape the narrative. "It's a risk, but it shows you're in charge," Vanessa said. Aisha agreed, choosing a national morning show in a tailored emerald dress. She faced the host, her voice steady. "What happened was a betrayal of Delta's values," she said. "No one should face violence or discrimination, period. We've terminated the employee, and we're overhauling training to prevent this. This is about rebuilding trust." The host probed for personal details, but Aisha redirected to Delta's reforms, earning praise for her poise. The interview boosted public support, and Delta's stock, after an initial dip, stabilized as investors saw her command. Then came a bombshell. An anonymous tipster, claiming to be Karen's former co-worker, sent Delta's HR department screenshots from a private social media group. The posts, spanning years, exposed Karen's racist rants memes mocking Black and Latino passengers, complaints about those people in economy, even slurs aimed at co-workers. One post, from 8 months prior, read, "Another entitled passenger thinking they run the plane. Stick to the ground." Aisha, briefed by HR Director James Kwan, felt a surge of anger. "This wasn't a one-off," she said. "How did we miss it?" James admitted flaws in Delta's screening. Social media wasn't routinely checked, and performance reviews often ignored behavioral red flags if metrics were met. The screenshots leaked to a major outlet, redacted, but clearly tied to Karen. Public fury reignited, and Delta's crisis team scrambled. Vanessa issued a follow-up statement. "We are horrified by evidence of past discriminatory behavior. Delta is reviewing all hiring and training protocols to eliminate such attitudes." Aisha pushed further, calling an executive meeting from Atlanta. "This is systemic," she said, her voice firm. "We need a third-party audit, mandatory bias training, and a zero-tolerance policy with teeth. No one gets a pass." Her team nodded, energized by her clarity. The audit was greenlit, and Aisha allocated funds for mental health support, recognizing stress as a factor, but not an excuse, legally. The case solidified. Aisha's attorneys filed a civil suit for assault and battery. Alongside the criminal charges, the viral passenger video, showing Karen's rant and slap, was undeniable, and the screenshots sealed her fate. Karen's defense floundered, her stress narrative crumbling. A trial date was set for 6 weeks out, and Aisha juggled depositions with her CEO duties overseeing Pacific expansion plans, meeting with investors, and visiting airports to boost morale. Marcus urged her to slow down, but Aisha was resolute. "This is bigger than me," she told him. "It's about every person who's been disrespected." Public support swelled. Customers praised Delta's transparency, sharing stories of improved service. Aisha's leadership became a beacon, inspiring calls for industry reform. As the trial loomed, she felt the weight, but also the purpose. This wasn't just a legal fight, it was a chance to redefine Delta, to make the skies a place where everyone belonged. The Atlanta courthouse stood like a sentinel under a crisp autumn sky, its stone facade absorbing the murmurs of reporters clustered on the steps. Inside, the air was heavy with anticipation. The wood-paneled courtroom a stark contrast to the chaotic cabin of Delta Flight 1832. Aisha Coleman sat in the front row, her navy blazer tailored to precision. Her braids swept into a low bun that mirrored her composed demeanor. Months had passed since Karen Walsh's assault, but the memory of that slap, its sharp sting, the venom of "you people," lingered like a shadow. As Delta's CEO, Aisha had navigated a media maelstrom, a legal battle, and a corporate reckoning, all while steering her airline toward a new horizon. Today, the trial's verdict would mark a turning point, not just for her, but for the 80,000 employees and millions of passengers who called Delta home. The weight of that responsibility anchored her, But so did her resolve to transform a moment of hatred into a legacy of change. The trial had been a crucible, each day peeling back layers of truth. Aisha's legal team, led by General Counsel Laura Patel, had built an ironclad case, the passenger video capturing Karen's slap in brutal clarity. Testimonies from Eleanor Rivera and other crew members, detailing her hostility, and the chilling screenshots of Karen's years-long racist social media posts. The defense, propped up by Karen's union, had leaned on a flimsy narrative of workplace stress and a what-I'm lapse, but the evidence was unrelenting. Aisha's testimony had been a pivotal moment, her voice steady as she faced the jury, her dark eyes unwavering. This wasn't a mistake born of exhaustion, she'd said, her words cutting through the room. It was a deliberate act rooted in prejudice that betrayed every passenger and employee of Delta. It's not just about me, it's about ensuring no one else endures this. The jury had listened, their faces somber, and now, as the judge read the verdict, guilty of assault and battery, Aisha allowed herself a slow, deliberate breath. Justice had been served, but she felt no thrill of victory, only a quiet resolve to move forward. Karen, seated at the defense table, seemed to shrink into herself, her gray suit hanging loosely on a frame worn thin by months of scrutiny. Her once confident posture was gone, replaced by a hunched resignation. The judge's sentence was measured but firm: 2 years probation, mandatory anger management and bias training, and a substantial fine that ensured a lasting financial sting. Jail time was avoided, but the criminal record would follow Karen like a shadow, a permanent mark on the 16-year career she'd once touted. As the gavel fell, Karen's eyes flicked to Aisha, a fleeting moment of contact that held a mix of regret and defiance. Aisha met her gaze, her expression unyielding but not cruel. Karen's fate was her own making, and Aisha's focus was on the future, not retribution. Outside, the courthouse steps were a gauntlet of cameras and microphones. Aisha emerged with Laura and Marcus Ellis, her chief of staff, at her side, her posture regal despite the chaos. "Today's verdict is a clear message," she said, her voice steady over the clamor. "Violence and discrimination have no place at Delta or in our society. We're committed to building an airline where every passenger and employee is respected, and this is just the beginning." Reporters pressed for more personal reactions, details of her pain, but Aisha deflected with grace, redirecting to Delta's reforms. She slipped into a waiting SUV, the tinted windows shielding her from the frenzy. But her phone buzzed with notifications, news alerts, supportive texts from board members, and a flood of social media posts. The public's response was a tidal wave of solidarity, with passengers sharing stories of Delta's improved service and employees voicing pride in Aisha's leadership. She forwarded key posts to Vanessa Reed, Delta's PR head, with a note: "Amplify these. Let's show the world who we are." Back at Delta's Atlanta headquarters, Aisha turned the crisis into a catalyst. The screenshots of Karen's posts had exposed a deeper rot gaps in hiring, training, and oversight that allowed toxic attitudes to fester. A third-party audit, launched in the trial's wake, laid bare the flaws: inconsistent performance reviews, a focus on metrics over behavior, and a reluctance to address soft issues like prejudice. Aisha presented the findings in a company-wide town hall, streamed to every Delta hub from Seattle to Miami. Standing at a podium, her voice resonant, she didn't sugarcoat the truth. "We failed to catch this sooner," she said, her image projected on screens in break rooms and offices. "But failure is a teacher. We're rebuilding a culture where respect isn't optional. It's the foundation." Employees listened, some nodding, others shifting uncomfortably, but all felt the weight of her commitment. The response was a sweeping diversity and inclusion initiative, unprecedented in Delta's history. Mandatory workshops tackled unconscious bias, conflict resolution, and cultural sensitivity, led by experts and, in some sessions, Eleanor Rivera, whose kindness on Flight 1832 had become a company touchstone. Aisha allocated millions for mental health resources, recognizing that stress could fuel toxicity, but was never an excuse. Anonymous reporting tools empowered employees to flag issues without fear, and a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination was codified, with clear consequences. To ensure accountability, Aisha revamped performance reviews, requiring managers to evaluate behavior alongside metrics. No. One slides by, she told her executive team. Not on my watch. Aisha didn't just lead from the C-suite, she hit the ground. She visited airports across the country, from the bustling terminals of JFK to the smaller hubs in Raleigh and Salt Lake City. In Chicago, she sat in a break room with flight attendants, listening as they shared the grind of long shifts and rude passengers. We want to do better, one said, but we need support. Aisha nodded, promising more rest periods and peer mentoring. In Dallas, she praised a gate agent for calming a frantic traveler, handing him a personal commendation. In Atlanta, she held a Q&A with baggage handlers, their faces weathered but attentive, and answered questions about pay and training with candor. These moments, often unscripted, rebuilt trust. Employees who'd dismissed the initiative as PR fluff began to believe, seeing Aisha's hands-on approach as proof of her sincerity. The results were tangible. Customer satisfaction surveys soared, with passengers noting friendlier gate agents, more empathetic flight attendants, and a transparent complaint system that actually worked. Delta's Safe Skies initiative, launched post-trial, set an industry benchmark, with rival airlines quietly adopting similar measures. Investors, once rattled by the scandal, rallied behind Aisha, and the board issued a unanimous endorsement, praising her transformative leadership. Internally, morale was a complex tapestry. Some employees grappled with shame, knowing Karen had been one of their own. Others found inspiration in Aisha's resolve, forming peer groups to discuss empathy and bias. Break rooms buzzed with debates about the daily grind, a sign that Delta was confronting its flaws head-on. For Aisha, the journey was deeply personal. The incident had stripped away her CEO armor, exposing her vulnerability as a black woman in a world quick to judge. It humbled her, deepening her empathy for frontline workers and passengers alike. She worked grueling hours, board meetings, legal consultations, airport visits, but found solace in small victories. A handwritten note from a passenger thanking Delta for its change. A nod from a baggage handler in Denver. A smile from Elena during a training session in Atlanta. These were the threads of Delta's new culture, one she hoped would endure long after her tenure. Karen Walsh faded into obscurity, her name a cautionary tale in Delta's training manuals. Rumor had it she'd taken a low-wage job in a small upstate New York town, her aviation career dead, her former colleagues unwilling to vouch for her. Aisha didn't dwell on Karen's fate. Her eyes were on the horizon. Years later, Flight 1832 remained a defining chapter in Delta's history, a story told in onboarding sessions and boardrooms. It was a testament to the power of accountability, the resilience of leadership, and the truth that one act of hatred could spark a movement for unity. Aisha closed her internal speeches with a simple call. The sky belongs to all of us. Let's make it a place where everyone can soar. The incident had reshaped Aisha, too. She carried the weight of her dual-role victim and leader with grace, but it had deepened her resolve to dismantle barriers, not just at Delta but in the broader world. She mentored young black women in aviation, sharing her story to inspire their climb. She partnered with community organizations to fund scholarships for underrepresented youth, ensuring the industry reflected the diversity of its passengers. And she never forgot the passengers of Flight 1832, whose outrage and support had fueled her fight. Delta was no longer just an airline, it was a symbol of what was possible when courage met conviction. As Aisha stood in a packed Atlanta hangar, addressing thousands of employees at Delta's annual meeting, she felt the weight of their trust. The hangar smelled of jet fuel and possibility, the crowd a sea of uniforms and hopeful faces. "We've been tested," she said, her voice amplified through the speakers. "But we've shown the world who we are. Every time you greet a passenger, stow a bag, or solve a problem, you're building our legacy. Let's keep rising together." The applause was deafening, a roar that echoed beyond the hangar, into the skies Delta called home. If this story of courage, justice, and transformation moved you, don't let it end here. Subscribe to the channel for more tales that inspire and challenge. Share it with others. And let's keep pushing for a world where respect lifts us all higher. The story of Aisha Coleman and the shocking incident aboard Delta Flight 1832 is more than a dramatic tale of confrontation and justice. It's a mirror held up to society, reflecting the persistent challenges of prejudice, the power of resilience, and the potential for systemic change. As the creator of this narrative, I've been deeply moved by its layers, and I want to share my reflections on why this story unfolded as it did, what it reveals about our world, and the profound lessons it offers viewers. This isn't just a recounting of events, it's a call to examine ourselves, our workplaces, and the spaces we share, urging us to build a future where respect is non-negotiable. At its core, this story began with a single, explosive moment: Karen Walsh's assault on Aisha Coleman, Delta's CEO, during a turbulent flight. The slap, preceded by Karen's racist outburst, "You people," wasn't a random act, but the culmination of unchecked biases, personal frustrations, and a workplace culture that failed to catch the warning signs. Karen, a veteran flight attendant, represents a troubling archetype, someone whose years of service masked a growing bitterness, fueled by perceived slights and a refusal to confront her own prejudices. Her actions were a breaking point, a moment where resentment boiled over into violence. But why did it happen? I believe it's because systems, whether corporate, social, or personal, often allow small cracks to widen. Delta's oversight missed Karen's toxic behavior, prioritizing metrics over character. Her union's defense, though weak, reflects a broader tendency to excuse stress rather than demand accountability. And Karen, herself, instead of reflecting, externalized her failures, targeting Aisha as a scapegoat for her discontent. Aisha's role as both victim and CEO adds a unique dimension to the story. As a Black woman leading a global airline, she embodies the trailblazer's burden, navigating spaces where she's often the only, while carrying the weight of representation. Her decision to travel incognito in economy class was a deliberate act of empathy, a desire to see Delta through the eyes of its customers. That choice made her vulnerable, exposing her to Karen's prejudice in a way her title couldn't shield. Yet, it also amplified her strength. Aisha's composure during the assault, her calculated reveal to the captain, and her insistence on transparency reflect a leader who understands that power lies in integrity, not vengeance. I crafted her character to show that leadership isn't about avoiding pain, but transforming it into purpose. Her journey resonates because it's universal. Many of us face moments where we must choose between silence and action, especially when the odds feel stacked against us. The story's setting in airplane cabin serves as a microcosm of society. Strangers from all walks of life, confined in a pressurized space, are forced to coexist. It's a place where tensions flare, where differences in race, class, or status can ignite conflict. Karen's outburst wasn't just about Aisha. It was a symptom of a broader discomfort with diversity, a resistance to the reality that the skies, like the world, belong to everyone. The passengers' reactions, shock, support, outrage, mirror how communities respond to injustice. Some spoke up, like the mother who shared her own experience with Karen's rudeness. Others watched silently, unsure how to act. This dynamic reflects our world, where leadership is vital but inconsistent, and silence can enable harm. I included these details to challenge viewers. What would you do in that cabin? Would you speak, or would you look away? The legal and corporate fallout. Karen's conviction, Delta's reforms, drives home the story's stakes. Karen's punishment, though lenient compared to the harm she caused, ensures accountability, stripping away her career and reputation. Her descent into obscurity, working a low-wage job far from aviation, underscores a harsh truth. Actions have consequences, especially when they harm others. Delta's response, driven by Aisha's vision, shows what's possible when leadership confronts failure head-on. The audit, the diversity training, the mental health resources, these weren't just plot points, but a blueprint for change. I wrote them to reflect real-world needs, drawing on studies like McKinsey's 2020 Diversity Report, which found that inclusive workplaces outperform competitors. Aisha's reforms, from anonymous reporting to behavior-focused reviews, address systemic gaps, showing that change requires both heart and structure. What does this story teach us? First, It's a reminder that prejudice doesn't vanish with time or tenure, it festers in the shadows. Waiting for a trigger, Karen's social media posts, revealed post-incident, weren't a surprise but a confirmation of a pattern Delta missed. This speaks to the need for vigilance, for systems that proactively root out bias rather than react to it. Second, it shows the power of resilience. Aisha's ability to channel personal pain into corporate transformation is a lesson in turning adversity into agency. She didn't just survive the assault, she used it to redefine Delta, making it a safer, more inclusive space. Third, it highlights the role of community. The passengers' support, Elena's kindness, even the anonymous tipster who exposed Karen's posts all were crucial to justice. No one fights alone, and collective action can shift the tide. For viewers, this story offers a mirror and a challenge. It asks us to examine our own biases, to question the systems we're part of, and to consider our role in moments of injustice. Have you ever witnessed a Karen in action, whether on a flight, at work, or in your community? Did you speak up, or did you hesitate? The story encourages us to be the passenger who supports, the co-worker who reports, the leader who reforms. It also reminds us that change is messy but possible. Delta's journey from scandal to renewal shows that even broken systems can be rebuilt with courage and accountability. Aisha's visits to break rooms, her mentorship of young Black women, her funding of scholarships, these are acts of hope, proof that one person's vision can ripple outward. Why did this story matter to me as its creator? I wanted to craft a narrative that felt real, that captured the complexities of 2025's social landscape, where progress and diversity coexists with persistent prejudice, where corporate promises are tested by human failings. Aisha's story is inspired by real-world leaders who've faced similar trials, from executives confronting workplace toxicity to activists demanding systemic change. I drew on reports, like the 2021 EEOC data showing racial discrimination's persistence in corporate America, and on aviation scandals that exposed cultural flaws, like the 2017 United Airlines incident. But I also infused hope, showing that transformation is possible when leaders like Aisha refuse to settle for the status quo. Her mantra, "The sky belongs to all of us," is my wish for the world, a place where everyone has a seat, not just in the cabin, but in the broader human story. For those watching, this story isn't just entertainment, it's a call to action. It teaches us that injustice thrives in silence, but it crumbles under scrutiny. It shows that leadership isn't about avoiding conflict, but facing it with clarity and compassion. And it reminds us that every choice to speak, to listen, to change shapes the world we share. Whether you're a traveler, an employee, or a leader, this story asks you to consider: how will you rise when tested? How will you ensure the skies, literal and metaphorical, are safe for all? I hope Aisha's journey stays with you, not just as a tale of triumph, but as a spark for your own. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Subscribe to the channel for more narratives that challenge, inspire, and push us to be better. Share it with friends, family, or co-workers. Let's start a conversation about respect and accountability. Comment below. What did Aisha's story teach you? Have you seen change in your own workplace or community? Together, we can keep the skies open for everyone.